again. Um, so someone asked me a couple days ago about spell points versus spell levels. Now, I don't know if any of you have looked into this at all, but spell points is an alternative magic system used from Dungeons and Dragons that is used to offer greater flexibility to spellcasters. This means that the spellcasters will have, instead of a certain number of spell slots that they get every level and level up, as they level up, they'll increase and level up a little more and they'll increase a little more. They get spell points every level and they can cast with those spell points however they like. So a level 1 spell might cost 3 spell points, a level 2 spell might cost 5 spell points, a level 5 spell might cost 10 spell points. It varies it depends on how the system works. But the the spell points are going to allow you to have greater flexibility, but they also tend to skew the spellcasting down towards low level spells because low level spells are cheap and modifying them is also cheap. You tend to get more cost benefit from low level spells than higher level spells when using spell points. This is not actually the case when you use spell levels because most spell slots, because you have them distributed sort of linearly skewing towards the middle, it's more beneficial to use a spell that's at a spell slot's level than it is to use a lower level one in that spell slot. So you get more benefit from using the low level or the higher level spells, and so people use them more. This is a I mean, it depends on your campaign, but the greater flexibility with the lower level the greater flexibility coming with rewarding lower level spellcasting means that you'll have some very interesting and potentially broken gameplay effects, which can be noted by the responses people had to psionics in 3rd edition. In 3rd edition, traditional spellcasters, wizards, clerics, druids, sorcerers, bards, rangers, paladins, they all got spell slots with different amounts of different level caps depending on whether they were a full caster or a half caster or and they had a limited number of spell slots by level. When psionics came out, they didn't use spell slots. They used spell points or psionic points or power points. I forget what they abbreviated it PP. Don't ask me why. But that meant that it encouraged you to use lower level powers. And people found psionics in 3rd edition to be horribly broken. People said it was broken from like day one, and it was a very common complaint about psionics in 3rd edition is that psionics in 3rd edition are broken. And I attribute that mostly to psionics being a PowerPoint or spellpoint based system, and not because psionics were actually much more powerful than traditional magic. There were a few spells that were much more powerful than most of the spells in the player's handbook for spell casting, but for the most part, spells in the psionic powers and the spells were pretty one to one with a few variations. They were very close. So the complaint about spellcasters being broken just it didn't mesh with my experience of spellcasting. Maybe somebody else has a different experience from me, and that they may have seen something different. But in my experience, spellcasting, psionics, pretty one to one, except one used spell levels and the other used spell points. So, advantage, disadvantage of them. First of all, encouraging low level casting, discouraging high level casting for spell points, and for spell levels, it encourages sort of higher level casting. You focus more on third, fourth, fifth level spells. You don't really have to worry about sixth, seventh, eighth, and ninth level spells as much because they don't come up until much later game. And by the time you're in late game, you're not worrying about spellcasters in the sense of what level spell they're casting. You're more worried about how they're casting and what they're doing to cast spells and how to counter spell effects that they have. So they're kind of two different two different things when you're talking about low level casters versus high level casters. You can't really compare them one to one. Um but since I've now talked about spell casting and spell points and spell levels about as much as I can come up with, unless somebody has another question about it, I'm moving to talking about running games, GMing, DMing, storytelling, narrating, whatever you want to call it. Different systems have different names for it. So in running a game, there's a number of pitfalls that new GMs can run into. One of the biggest pitfalls that somebody runs into when they're running games is reward balancing. When you when you have rewards, there tends to be a new GMs have a tendency to either go heavy on treasure or too light on treasure. Either they give the players everything they could possibly want or almost nothing. And that's a difficult thing to fix because if you give them almost everything that you want or they might want, then what do you give them next? You have to keep upping the ante and upping the ante and upping the ante, and eventually they're just too powerful. You can't throw any challenges at them. They're overwhelmingly powerful, and there's nothing you can do about it. On the other hand, if you give them too little treasure, they aren't properly equipped. They level up faster than they can get treasure, and that causes other problems. So, what do you do when you have these situations? Well, there's a couple of things that you can do. Apologize for moving the camera. I needed to change positions and get my drink. And over here. So, what do you do when you have too little or too much treasure being passed around? Well, you have a couple of choices. If you're giving out too much treasure, you start to pull back a little bit and you change the tone of your game. Now, what do I mean by change the tone of your game? Well, there's different styles of playing the game. And typically when you're giving out too much treasure, you're playing a lot of dungeoneering and combat heavy games. And when you do that, you're I mean, first of all, it's a very one-dimensional game if you're dungeon crawls. I don't particularly enjoy only doing dungeon crawls. I actually enjoy the role-playing side more than the dungeon crawls myself. Not that I never enjoy a dungeon crawl. Dungeon crawls can be lots of fun. But if I go 2 months with just dungeon crawls, I'm bored. Very bored of dungeon crawls and stand it. They're not fun to consistently do all the time. So instead of doing hundreds and hundreds of dungeon crawls, I like to do around the town things. Go to court, visit a tavern, walk through the marketplace, meet people, talk to people, do diplomacy. These are all things you can do that will make it so that all that treasure that they gathered might be used for other things. There are different things that you can use them for that are sometimes better for... I mean, players will get a different experience and they'll learn new things. Want to run a game that's interesting and it challenges your players and challenges their characters. So if they've been running dungeon crawls and they've accumulated a lot of wealth, maybe the king invites them to court. And on their way to court, well, they need to get outfits that are appropriate for court, because you can't go to court in your blood-stained chainmail. I'm sorry, the king won't let you in. You need to get clothes that work there. So spend money on that. And you want to show up looking... You want to show up in style, so you get a carriage with nice horses. And you spend your money on that. And so you encourage them to spend their money on things that are tangential to getting more powerful, but are motivating for them to acquire. On the other hand, if you're handing out too little treasure, well, you need to just up the ante a little bit. You just hand out just a little more. It's usually pretty obvious when you're not handing out enough treasure. You've got a level 5 party and they have hardly any magic items. Probably not enough treasure. This is, by the way, dependent upon edition. Second edition, level 5 party, you might only have some potions. In third edition, level 5 party, there better be at least 2+2 weapons in the group. Just like completely different editions, completely different systems for that. You can't hardly compare them. But, I mean, you need to hand out treasure. People need to get stuff. Another thing to keep in mind as a new GM is the, different scopes of gameplay that you're going to, have to keep in mind. Obviously, there's the player's immediate world, their immediate surroundings, their locale. When players do things, stuff happens. You kill orcs, the town praises you and gives you some gold. Simple, basic. They go looking for the Thieves Guild, they find the Thieves Guild. Basic stuff, the adventures, the bread and butter of D&D. But that shouldn't be where your game stops, where the player's influence stops. If they're really the center of your world, while they aren't the center of all things happening, things that happen in the world should impact things around them. So you need to look up at the region. What is the local lord doing? What shapers and movers are in their immediate area. They're a tribe of hill giants that, while they won't see them for 5 or 6 more levels, is doing something that they should hear about at some point or see side effects from. Maybe certain things are scarce because these hill giants are raiding all of the caravans carrying this one item because they're in between this region and another region. Something to keep in mind when you're working on running games. And then there's sort of your high level events. Your kings of empires and your colossal ancient red dragons and characters like that. You should keep in mind those characters and at least have an idea what they're going to be doing, because that's kind of where your end game content will be. When you start getting your players up in level, they will start having to deal with those people, because level 10, level 12, level 15 adventurers, they can handle taking on a medium-sized red dragon or a tribe of hill giants, and that's going to affect the world, and people should take notice of that. That shouldn't be just assumed that's normal behavior. There shouldn't be thousands of adventurers out there just taking out tribes of hill giants, hunting hill giants to extinction. That sounds weird and strange and bizarre, and I mean, like, just think about in the real world. If there was a group, if there were groups of people just hunting alligators all the time, hundreds and hundreds of people hunting alligators all the time, alligators would be extinct. When hundreds and hundreds of people are hunting an animal, those animals are gone. And I mean, maybe your world is like that, but then it should be noticed. You should have players running across adventurers left and right. It shouldn't be like... Your RPG should not be like an MMO, where a dungeon respawns once a week and you go do weekly raids on the same place all the time. Unless you're playing a really weird lit RPG book or something like that. I don't even remember what the genre is. But it's a... Unless you're playing in a very, very weird game, things that you do should actually affect the world. They shouldn't be respawning dungeon crawls that you just did this adventure 2 weeks ago and you're doing it again because, well, you ran out of ideas. That's not a very good role-playing game. There are other things you can do that want to go around and dungeon crawl every week, then go play Diablo with your friends. I mean, not to say you can't play D&D, but if all you want to do is dungeon crawl all the time, probably not spending your time most efficiently for trying to play D&D. Just saying. On the other hand, if all you're doing is storytelling all the time, you probably should just do improv, and why bother with presuming D&D at all? You aren't using the rules at all. Doing rules. Why are you using rules if you aren't actually going to use them? I can play I can do fantasy improv, or I can play D&D. They're very different things. So, all your friends want to do is roleplay. Hard to do that instead. It's basically what you're doing anyway. So, you sort of want to ride the middle ground. You want to balance the dungeon crawls with the role-playing. Have there be a few sessions of role-playing, a few sessions of dungeon crawl, a few sessions of role-playing, a few sessions of dungeon crawl. And the exact ratio will be up to you and the players. But keep that in mind. Also, don't forget the rule of cool or the rule of fun. Don't let the system get in the way of having a good time. If It would be totally awesome if your elf did a backflip off of a ledge and stabbed the ogre in the back. Then that's what happened. Doesn't matter. You don't need to. You don't need to roll the dice. Rolling the dice is completely pointless. If he rolled a critical, let him have decapitated the dang thing. Doesn't matter. Physics be damned. You don't care. It's completely beside the point. Be having fun. That's the point of a role playing game. That's why you're playing a role playing game. So, who cares if your role playing game breaks the rules? That's not the point. If you really want to play a rules heavy game, play miniatures. War games exist for a reason. So you can go and have rule fights and roll lots of dice. If what you really want to do is roll dice, there's games for that. Role playing games are for having a more well rounded experience. I encourage you to delve into it, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask. I have lots of experience running and playing a large number of systems that I can recommend. To say for today. So that's all. Thank you for listening to Wednesday and have a good night.